In this video, we'll cover aspects of nonverbal delivery. Just as with vocal delivery, you want to make sure your nonverbal delivery enhances the message rather than detracts from it. For example, you don't want to move just for movement's sake. Having too many movements can be distracting and might come across as unnatural. If your audience is focused on the fact that you are pacing, they are likely missing your message. So, when we talk about nonverbal delivery, we are discussing strategies you can use to enhance your delivery. You do not need to, and likely should not try to, use all of these strategies in just one speech. In nonverbal delivery, you first want to pay attention to your physical appearance. First and foremost, you want to dress appropriately for the situation. If you are over or underdressed, you will likely feel uncomfortable delivering your speech. So, make sure to choose clothing and accessories that enable you to feel confident. When you know you look the part, you will be more confident in delivery than if you aren't sure if your outfit is appropriate. For a classroom speech, business casual is normally most appropriate. If, however, you are giving a speech at an outdoor rally, you might wear a sweatshirt with the organization's logo and a pair of nice jeans. There is no hard and fast rule for what to wear when delivering a speech. Ultimately, you want your clothing to communicate your confidence and credibility. Dressing appropriately for the situation will help you do that. Also, make sure that you don't fidget with your accessories or your hair. Continually playing with an accessory or removing hair from your face is distracting, and your audience might focus on that movement rather than your message. You also want to consider your physical appearance as you approach the podium or the front of the room to start speaking. You want to make sure you are projecting confidence and credibility from the time you leave your seat until the time you start your speech. To make sure you are projecting a positive image of yourself, make sure you don't start your speech while you are walking to the front of the room. Rather, walk up with confidence. Take your spot, take a quick glance at your notes, make eye contact with your audience, and then begin your speech. The same holds true at the end of your speech. Don't start walking away while you are still talking. Finish your speech, make eye contact with the audience one last time, gather your notes, and then walk back to your seat with purpose. When considering nonverbal delivery, you also want to pay attention to movement. If you only stand behind a podium or the teaching station with the computer screen keeping half the audience from seeing your face, you risk losing your audience because your speech isn't visually interesting. Standing behind furniture is especially problematic for individuals who aren't very tall because it might appear as if you are just a head floating above the podium. Typically, students in public speaking classes prefer to speak behind the podium. It provides a physical barrier between you and the audience, which can be comforting. As comforting as it might feel, your job as a speaker is to connect with your audience, and moving away from the podium will make it easier for you to foster that connection. Beyond moving away from the podium, the main thing you want to do is make sure that all of the movement you inject into your speech is planned and purposeful. You might choose to move to a new spot in the room as you transition to each new point. Or you might choose to step towards your audience to create a greater connection with them, right before you invite them to volunteer for an organization that is near and dear to your heart. No matter what you choose to do, make sure your movements have purpose. Aimlessly walking back and forth can be distracting, much more distracting than standing in the same place for the whole speech. So if you know you have a tendency to pace, you might opt to come out from behind the podium and keep your legs planted in one spot. That way you won't pace, which is distracting, but you will be closer to the audience. We won't spend a lot of time discussing types of gestures because your book does a good job of covering those on pages 259 and 260. When strategically implementing gestures in your speech, it is important to remember that there isn't an optimal number of gestures for a speech. Whether you are a person who uses many or few gestures, what you really want to do is ensure that your gestures support your messages. So, you could illustrate the statements on the one hand and on the other hand by physically moving one hand forward and then putting it down and offering the other hand at the appropriate time. Gestures like movement don't have to be used when delivering a speech. A well-placed gesture can add interest to a presentation where the speaker chooses to mostly stand still. But it is not essential to use an excessive number of gestures. Rather, it is important to consider where you want to use gestures and use them to support and enhance your message. Perhaps the most important element of nonverbal delivery is eye contact. Through regular eye contact, you will be able to connect with your audience and make them feel that your message is truly for them. Good eye contact takes practice because, ultimately, your goal is to make sure that every member of the audience believes that you are making eye contact with them. You do this by scanning the room and making sure that you make meaningful eye contact with the majority of individuals in each section of the audience. Meaningful eye contact simply means that you meet their gaze and hold it for a second or two, long enough for them to notice, before you move your gaze to a new section of the audience. Here are some eye contact behaviors you want to avoid. The head bobber bobs his head up and down as he quickly shifts his gaze from his note cards to the audience. This communicates nervousness. The balcony gazer looks over the heads of her audience rather than looking at individuals. You might not think your audience will be able to tell when you're doing this, but they typically can. If the speaker in the auditorium above were a balcony gazer, she would be looking to the entryways at the top of the room rather than looking at the individuals in the room. While you likely can't make meaningful eye contact with many audience members when speaking to an audience this size, you'll want to be looking at the audience and catching the gaze of as many audience members as you can. Finally, you don't want to be the obsessor. This is the person who stares at one or two people during the entire speech. If you are a person who tends to provide positive reinforcement to speakers via facial expressions, be aware that novice speakers might have a tendency to look at you more often than others. This is because most people in the audience won't be visually connected to the speaker, and therefore any person who tends to get a bit more attention when the speaker is relatively new is that person. Of course, you could ensure that none of your classmates are obsessors by making sure to provide positive facial expressions to help out all the speakers. If the majority of the audience is doing this, the nervous speaker will be able to look at the majority of the audience and feel less nervous. Finally, know that it is okay to read off your note cards when you're reading a quotation. In other words, you don't have to try and memorize quotations because any statement worth quoting should be important enough that you can't get it wrong. Thus, your audience will appreciate it and you'll build credibility by reading the quotation to them. The last nonverbal delivery element to remember is to be excited about your topic. You want your delivery to showcase animation and excitement about what you're talking about. If you don't appear to care, you'll never get us to care. Thus, being animated and enthusiastic will help you sell your speech. You can do this by smiling, maintaining a pleasant disposition where appropriate, and overall actually being excited about your topic. Therefore, it's important to pick topics you care about so that you can convey a high level of excitement when you're delivering your speeches. So, as we saw in this video, it is important to strategically use nonverbal behaviors to help our audience members become and stay interested in our speeches. We can do that by paying attention to our physical appearance, movement, gestures, eye contact, and enthusiasm.